Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast, right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host back again, Brice Lewis, to talk about everything that's happened during this crazy Wildcard weekend, Super Wildcard weekend they call it. So we're going to go and recap everything that has happened basically. This is a recap show. We're going to recap all the games. Decided to give each game its own specific attention today on today's show. Plus talk about each team and the directions moving forward. Obviously more to talk about with teams going home, looking towards the offseason, and then the teams moving on forward to the next round. We're also going to talk about big news that has came out about Deshaun Watson and his relationship with Houston, where he may, if he did demand a trade too. We're going to discuss that. And we're also going to talk, I'm also going to compare the person that he's going to be, who he would be swapped for in a trade, to another quarterback in the league, in terms of people who maybe not think that he's not going to be a good quarterback or potentially could be a good quarterback in the league for years to come. So let me go ahead and get right into that. So, as we have known for the past week, Deshaun Watson has not been happy with the Houston Texans. They promised him that he would have some type of, he would have a say in who they would hire, GM and head coach. Not even necessarily they're going to go with what he says, but just have input into the process. Steve McNair promised him this ability, this right. And so then what happened is Steve McNair, or Bob McNair, I don't know why I keep saying Steve McNair, Bob McNair, the owner of the Houston Texans, it's Bob McNair. He went ahead and hired Nick Caserio of the New England Patriots without consulting Watson. And then Deshaun Watson also wanted him to at least interview Eric Bellamy, and they don't even give him an interview, or they're not planning to. So that pissed Deshaun off. Plus, we can also get into the fact that Bob McNair also hired a firm to help him hire a guy and completely went against the firm that he paid money to go with a guy he wanted. And so this has made Deshaun Watson very unhappy. He's also unhappy about some of the social injustice takes and basically stands that the team has made. Really the ownership. I mean, they say it's not a big deal, but it contributes. It's one of those small things that you can kind of dabble in there. And then obviously we know what happened last year with DeAndre Hopkins. And so there is one team that they're saying that Deshaun Watson is open to being traded to. And that team is the Miami Dolphins. Chris Mortensen reported that Deshaun Watson would be interested in waiving his no-trade clause that he signed his massive contract last offseason to go to the Miami Dolphins in a swap for Tua Tagovailoa. So, clearly, if you're the Miami Dolphins, this is something you clearly have to consider if it's for real. If Deshaun Watson, because here's the thing we have to make correct. He has actually currently not demanded the trade. Currently, Deshaun Watson's on vacation right now. But it must be from within his camp that he's thinking of, if he did ask for a trade, he'd want to go to Miami, is one of the teams we know so far he would want to go to. And if you're Miami, that would be an interesting proposition. There are some people who are questioning Tua already, if seeing how he ended the year. People are wondering, can he really be the guy? That's a big question moving forward. Can he really be the guy moving forward? And so the thing with this situation is, are they willing to go in that direction? Now, they're going to have to give up a lot. This isn't a trade they can just give up just a little bit. You're going to have to start with Tua and maybe your two first-round draft picks, at least. And that may not even be enough to get Houston to sign off on the deal. Because people said Houston was looking at as much as 3 first-round picks to even start a conversation. Because they at least want 3 first. Because Bill O'Brien, one thing he left his team with after he was fired was he did not leave them with much draft capital. He traded for a lot of guys. Laramie Tunsil was one of those guys. Gave away a lot of draft capital for these guys. So they don't really have a lot of draft capital to rebuild this team. And so clearly if they did make a trade like this, they would want to regain their draft capital, which is smart on their end. It's like the NBA situation with James Harden. They gave up a lot of draft capital for a lot of people James Harden wanted. Now they're like, if we're trading James, we want to recruit that draft capital back for the type of player he is. So clearly Miami would have to give him up. People have said they may have to give Xavier Howard, potentially the Pro Bowl corner. I mean, it's a very complex situation, and it's not impossible because Miami has the money and draft capital. It's just, do they want to give up now that draft capital and money to get Deshaun Watson? So that's going to be their big question here. But it kind of makes me want to talk about Tua because, you know, there's a lot of people who think after seeing what we saw at the end of last year, Tua may not be as good as we thought. And, you know, I feel like we're too sometimes since this is a what have you done for me lately kind of league, I feel like sometimes we like to kind of, I don't want to say rush, but we do sometimes tend to want results quickly. We want results now. We want results instantly. And so sometimes that causes us to make dramatic decisions. And I think what's happening with Tua is that people are seeing how he ended the year and think, oh, I don't know. And I think what also hurts Tua is that people feel like he doesn't have a special skill. Like he doesn't have the running ability of a Lamar Jackson or the arm of a Josh Allen and certain things that can make him still be good even if he needs to keep up with other things. They just think he's just an accurate quarterback. But there's one quarterback in this league that's currently starting for a team that I think reminds me exactly of Tua. And now he's a playoff quarterback who just got his first playoff win. And that's Baker Mayfield. Now, before you maybe sit here and ask yourself, well, how is that? Just hear me out. Remember Baker Mayfield. What was his skills coming out of college? He was an accurate quarterback. That's the same thing as Tua. But he didn't have a strong arm. He wasn't that athletic. He didn't have a special skill. And he was kind of small. Baker is not as small as Tua because Tua is a small man. Baker's kind of more chunkier, a little bit bigger, but still small. They're both around the same height. I want to say 6 foot, 6'1" maybe. They're both around kind of the same height. They're not too far away in height. And so basically, if you think about their draft analysis, they're both top 5 picks. Baker number 1, Tua number 5. And think about it. First year we saw Baker, we thought, oh, he can play because we saw his accuracy and everything. Then the second year came, Freddie Kitchens' year. Now he looked like a disaster. Couldn't read defenses, turning the ball over left and right, thinking he was more athletic than what he was. He struggled tremendously, even with offensive weapons. See, and that's why we thought, oh, he's not that good because they have all these weapons and they're not playing well. Now, you can incorporate into that mix. Freddie Kitchens wasn't the best coach for the situation. Baker felt like he had to force it to Odell. There were a lot of different things you could have maybe said contributed to why that was the case. But now look at what you've seen from Baker Mayfield this year. Think about the improvements and the strides he's made. Think about that. He got a coach who can coach. They still have a great supporting cast. And now Baker looks great. And really his season turned around after the Odell Beckham because, like I said, Odell Beckham is a big name receiver who you can tell demands it. He demands the ball. And so Baker felt like, yeah, this might be a better route, but Odell. And so when Odell left, he didn't feel that way. And so you see when he can spread the ball around to all of the weapons, you see how good Cleveland can be. And I feel like Tua's in the same situation because, listen, started out well, ended not the best. But here's the thing about the Miami Dolphins we know. They were one of the worst rushing attacks in the NFL last year. Devontae Parker was hurt. Mike Gesicki was hurt. Preston Williams was out for the year. They were playing games where they basically had receivers who did not have literally more than 2-3 games of experience in terms of starting experience. So you had a lot of inexperienced wide receivers, young wide receivers, a lot of wide receivers that converted to wide receivers. And so it's not like, and then offensive line was better than last year, but still needed improvement. Had a lot of young guys, but still wasn't the best. And then you told Tua to come out there and light it up. And I'm sitting here and I'm just like, they have nobody who can stretch the field. And to me, I kind of sat there and I was just like, we're trying to be critical of Tua, but if we look at the situation and we look at the talent, was he really put in that position to be successful? His first year offensively from a big play standpoint. People talk about, whoa, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert had the best offensive weaponry than all of the quarterbacks who were drafted. Is it really that surprising he put up those kind of numbers? It's just people thought maybe Justin Herbert wasn't that good more than anything. Joe Burrow has better weapons. A.J. Green, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, 1,000-yard receiver, Joe Mixon, 1,000-yard running back. They're not scrubs. That's a good weaponry. That's why the Bengals were able to score in games. The issue is their offensive line, which obviously is why his season ended early. But Tua, out of all three of those quarterbacks, had the worstest offensive weaponry, which to me is why he didn't put up the best numbers. Now, yes, there's clearly things Tua needs to work on, but he's young. Remember, most of last offseason, he was trying to rehab to show teams he could play. He wasn't necessarily able to sit here and work on his game, so to say. I mean, I'm sure he worked on his game, but you know what I mean. You're trying to get healthy. Didn't have any type of offseason with Miami and basically had training camp in the games. And so to me, I feel like we can't make a true determination of Tua till you get upgraded weapons. The Dolphins need an offensive coordinator, maybe a better offensive coordinator than Chan Gailey. And if you put weapons around him, I always feel like you can give a cleaner evaluation of a player if you put weapons about him. If you give this man offensive weapons and he struggles, then you know he's just not a good quarterback. To me, you can't remember Baker, his second year, coaching was an issue, offensive line was an issue, confidence was an issue. He maybe wasn't as dedicated as he needed to be. You change all of that. So year 3, and now he looks like a franchise quarterback. He looks like a guy who you can win games and win playoff games with. And I think that's the same type of, the same type of path we need to give Tua. Let Miami upgrade the weapons. Let Miami upgrade the coach. Upgrade the offensive line. Then see how he performs. If he struggles like he did at the end of last year, next year, then we know Tua he's not the guy. He's just not the guy. But if he plays better, allows himself, and trust me, Tua's a smart guy. Tua's the type of guy to me who's going to see, okay, I need to work on this offseason. Let me work on this. Let me get with my coaches. Remember, I'm expecting the NFL to have more of an offseason because of the fact they've gone through the protocols. Because I don't think they want another offseason where you don't ever really see the players till training camp again. So I think they're going to have offseason workouts. They're clearly just going to go through protocol. And I think that's going to help Tua tremendously. Because, listen, if Baker can get better, and remember, same exact way, they not that athletic, not that elusive. Accuracy is his best trait. Doesn't have a strong arm. Literally, Tua and Baker are the same player, basically. If Baker can do it, then Tua can do it. Because sometimes you just got to work with a guy, and he'll get better. I feel like sometimes we are in this league of just, hey, if he don't work out within the next few games, you got to get rid of him. There are certain guys. Dwayne Haskins, you could tell from the way Dwayne Haskins played, he wasn't going to be good. He just looked like he was unready. He just looked overwhelmed. Tua never looked overwhelmed. It was just, he just didn't play good. There's a difference from not playing good and looking overwhelmed. He didn't look overwhelmed out there. Dwayne Haskins, you could tell he was a deer in headlights. And so that's why I think we need to give Tua a chance to show what he can do with an upgraded offensive weaponry and coach. And then we can make a cleaner evaluation of Tua and say, okay, if he can play or not. Because if Baker can make the improvement, why can't Tua? But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to start doing the Wildcard recap. We're going to review the first 2 games of Wildcard Weekend right here on the podcast. So stay tuned.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we discussed Deshaun Watson's big trade request about him being unhappy in Houston. Didn't really go into it too deep outside of the details, but just because it's still early in the process, we still haven't gotten an official demand of a trade. I'll probably go into more deeper detail if Deshaun gets to that point, but just wanted to give you the overall aspects of what basically is being reported right now, where he would want to go, which is the Miami Dolphins, and potentially could be in a swap for Tua. But then it proceeded to lead me into talking about Tua and how people were giving up on him. Some people thought, they need to get rid of Tua now. He's not the guy, Deshaun Watson, or draft another guy. And I just said, hold on a second now. Y'all thought Baker was washed, and now look at him winning playoff games. So just saying, you don't always have to jump ship so quickly. But, that's neither here or there. So now let's get into the playoff recap, where we talk about the playoff games from the past week again. And we're gonna start from the first playoff game, and then we'll end off with the last playoff game. Bills and Colts. This was a very competitive game, very good game. The Bills almost lost it at the end. Josh Allen almost lost the fumble and almost gave Colts great field position. And they could have won the game, but they still had a chance anyway. The Colts, one thing I want to say about the Colts, I know a lot of people came into this game probably thinking the Bills were going to wipe the Colts. And the reason why we say that is because we look at the Phillip Rivers versus Josh Allen matchup and think, well, Josh Allen over Phillip Rivers all day. But Phillip Rivers can still play. And remember, the Colts still have one of the better rosters in the league. It's not like this is a bad roster, and I think that was on display in this game. Now, if you look at the two teams here, we're going to get into Buffalo first. Buffalo, obviously, Josh Allen getting his first playoff victory. Second seed, obviously, you were expected to do that. They finally had fans of the games, made some noise. Buffalo, you can see, Josh Allen's just so good at off-script plays. A guy who can, great arm. And it's so crazy, but I feel like every quarterback needs a set of wide receivers and tight ends that fit them. And what I mean by that is, think about it. You have your deep threat in Stephon Diggs, a guy who's a playmaker. You got your slot guy in Cole Beasley. Hopefully he's healthy next week. He re-injured himself this week, so hopefully he can go next week against the Ravens next week. And because he definitely helps that offense a lot. People don't realize how important he is to that Bills offense. John Brown's healthy, Stephon Diggs, they use all three of their tight ends, And it's funny because the running game really was what Buffalo has been known for years, is the running game. You had Devil Singletary, had a great rookie year last year. You drafted another running back you felt really good about, and then it felt like they didn't run the ball as much, but they used it more in the passing game, and obviously they split carries. The Bills look like a team to me who clearly was one of the hottest teams coming into the playoffs. They played a very competitive game. They won. And listen, they have another game next week at Buffalo against the Ravens, and I expect them to play well. I expect it's a rematch of a game they played earlier in the year, and I think the Bills are ready to go. Because you look at this team, they're a very complete team. Now, I've always said the Bills are a little susceptible in the back end, which I think you saw in this game, because they did let up some plays in the pass game a lot, especially the Michael Pittman Jr. of the Colts. So the Bills can be had on the back end, because they're not as good as they were last year defensively, but they're still a very good defense that can be very optimistic. And then if you look at what's happening on the Colts side, I mean, listen, this is more looking towards the offseason. The big question for them is Phillip Rivers. What is Phillip Rivers going to do? Everybody, I think, is kind of gearing up for Phillip Rivers to retire because he made those comments for Week 17. Hey, if we don't make the playoffs, this might be my last game. All the indication is, since he's on a one-year deal, he will probably not be re-signed by the Colts, especially if they can get their hands on Carson Wentz this offseason. And so if you look at that, I think if Carson Wentz can become the quarterback we thought he was, you could potentially see, and if Carson Wentz gives him that better quarterback play, the Colts overall could be a better team just because of that. And like I said, they have the roster. Now, if I was the Colts, where I would maybe make an upgrade, you seem like you got you a star running back in Jonathan Taylor. Marlon Mack will be back next year. You have four running backs, basically. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with the running back situation. Receivers, you have good receivers. Now, T.Y. Hilton has been injury prone these last few years. And I would think if you're the Colts, I feel like you need some juice. You need a big play guy. You can create big plays, but you need a guy who's a big play receiver. And I think that would be the next step for them on the offensive end. Defensively, they're one of the better. Like I said, they're a top 5 defense. The Colts are a lot of people never looked at the Colts and knew that, but they're a top 5 defense. And so they can play with a lot of teams. Listen, every defense has a bad day, but they're a very good defense. And so overall, the Colts still have a very bright future. They could easily be in this position next year. It doesn't look like, unless they have big injury issues, they're going to fall off whatsoever. That's the reason why they got Phillip Rivers, because they look at their roster and say, listen, this is a playoff roster. We just need a quarterback good enough to get us there. Okay, now we've gotten there, and we know we probably have to upgrade again to actually get somewhere. If Carson Wentz, if they were able to pull off that trade for Carson Wentz and get better at the quarterback position, this Colts team would be head and shoulders a team that you have to maybe look at next year as a contender. Because if they got the quarterback, they literally they can run the football, throw, they can defend, they can get after the passer. It really is one of the more complete rosters, I would say, in the NFL. So the Colts have a good future ahead, but the Bills right now are going to advance to the next round. And listen, they're a trendy Super Bowl pick at this point for a reason, because they're playing really good football. So we got to watch out for them. And then we got to get into our second game. The Rams and the Seahawks. This game was I wouldn't say shocking, but this game definitely kind of made you turn your head a little bit. First, let's just talk about the Rams first before I get into Seattle. They started the game with their backup quarterback, because even though Jared Goff was active, clearly Sean McVay said, okay, he's still hurt where I think it will affect him. And so I don't want to just say you're my starting quarterback right away. You know what I'm saying? I can understand. A lot of coordinators won't do that. A lot of coaches won't do that. If you're healthy, even if you're hindered, they're playing you. Even if, I guess you can even say if it's to the detriment of the team, potentially. Even though you never feel like it is, because you feel like he is our best player, or one of our best players. But he went with a backup. Then he suffered a scary injury early into the game. Neck injury, had to go to the hospital. As far as we know, everything's okay. And so then they had to put Jared Goff out there anyway. And then, listen, you could clearly tell when he came into the game, that thumb it was bothering him. You could clearly tell it was still in a lot of pain. He was still hurt. So it'll be interesting to monitor his health the next week. But he played commendable. After the first couple of series, didn't throw for a lot of yards, clearly, but played well enough and made the throws that were there to win the game. Because defensively, the Rams dominated Seattle. And this is where I'm going to kind of get over into Seattle a little bit. What has been Seattle's Achilles heel this entire year? Their offensive line. At the beginning of the year, Russell Wilson was just so on fire that it didn't even matter. He couldn't even get protected. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf were going off. But if you notice the last month of the season, Seattle struggled to score points. The thing is, their defense played better, so they didn't have to score as many points. But now, they weren't really able to score points in this game. And the Rams, people say that they have Russell Wilson's number, because if you look at the way they're constructed to beat the Seahawks. They can get pressure up the middle of Aaron Donald, so they can get in at Russell Wilson's face. And they're a very good pass rushing team in general. Then you have Jalen Ramsey, one of the best corners, not the best corner in the NFL, locking down DK Metcalf, one of the better receivers in the game. So you have a matchup for those. You have your strength versus their weakness, and then you have a strength on strength. So if you look at that, basically, unless they can establish a running game and every other receiver gets involved, Seattle was going to struggle offensively, which they did. And the Rams with Sean McVay, what makes them so difficult to beat is that Sean McVay is such an innovative offensive mind. He's always going to find a way, how against whatever defense, how can I get them in the best position to make plays? How can I get them in the best position to make a big play or get these chunks? Remember, one thing that helped the Rams, they had great running success by Cam Akers. He returned. And the craziest thing also is the Rams got healthy for this game. Andrew Whitworth, one of their best, if not their best offensive lineman, came back. Cam Akers, their explosive running back, came back. Cooper Kupp got cleared. Jared Goff came back. They were healthy for this game, basically. And they got some of their best players back. It showed. Seattle could not stop them on the ground. Cam Akers had a big day on the ground, and that was needed just because of the fact since Jared Goff was hindered with the thumb, you couldn't sit here and say, Jared, we need you to throw it 50 times for over 300 yards to win this game. And as a Seattle, you should be disappointed because you basically knew, okay, Goff is clearly hindered. Let's zero in the run and make him beat us with his injured thumb. And they couldn't do that. And the Rams were able to take advantage. And Sean McVay, when he sees blood in the water, he will attack it. And so now, Seattle's going into this offseason thinking to themselves, well, dang. So I guess we need to improve on the back end. We still need to improve up front. And literally, it's literally the same issue. You have to give Russell Wilson an offensive line. If Russell Wilson has an offensive line, I swear to you, the Russell Wilson we started at the beginning of this year wouldn't have gone away. It's just throughout the season, teams learned how to attack you. They learned how to attack the Seahawks. Teams took advantage. They made plays. Seattle couldn't. That was the big issue. And so Seattle put themselves in a position where basically at this point, you have to make some upgrades. Because you have to get a more established running game. You got to get your running backs healthy. Seattle always has running backs that are healthy and not healthy, healthy and not healthy, healthy and not healthy. They got to fix that. Because remember, with Russell Wilson, you'll always have a chance to have a good season. You'll always have a chance to make playoffs. But if you actually want to do something when you get there, you have to improve the overall talent of the team if that's going to actually happen. And then on the Rams side, a tremendous performance by Jared Goff. Like I said, another week with that thumb is going to be very interesting to see. Can his thumb get a little bit healthier? Because if it can, that means Sean McVay can say, okay. Because it looks like Jared Goff's going to have to start. After an injury like that, I don't think their backup quarterback is going to come back and play. Maybe in the playoffs. So they're going to probably have to sign a guy anyway. But Goff's going to have to play, and you're going to have to hope, hey, if the defense can pitch another game like they did, play another great game, and then they can get the type of running attack they had, the Rams are going to have a chance to get to the Super Bowl to me. They have a very big game next week against Green Bay. That's going to be a big game for both sides. You could say the Rams are built to beat Green Bay. By the way, honestly, the way the Rams are built, they're built to beat any team in the league and win the Super Bowl. It's just all of a matter on the offense consistency and Jared Goff. And Green Bay has a tough fight coming, and they got to be physical like they were against Tennessee in the snow. They got to come back and be physical again, because that's the kind of game it has to be against the Rams. So it'll be very interesting to see that game, play out. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to get into 2 more wildcard games, so stay tuned right here on the GSMC Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we reviewed 2 playoff games. Bills and Colts. First game we talked about everything that came out of that game, and Rams and Seahawks as well. But before we continue reviewing playoff games, please don't forget to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football. That's GSMC_football, where we can keep up and talk about all the latest happenings in the football world, trade rumors, discussions, games, scores, highlights, everything right there. We love to hear back from you guys and interact with us on Twitter, as that is what we use primarily here at GSMC Football Podcast. So please don't forget, again, to remind you to follow us on Twitter at GSMC_football. So now we're going to continue on, talk about the next 2 playoff games. We're going to talk about the Saturday night game first, between Tom Brady, Tampa Bay, and the Washington football team. So first, coming into this game, I think a lot of people were surprised that Alex Smith didn't play, because he was sore last week, played. We knew his mobility would be an issue, but I know that, everybody was thinking, well, he played last week and he didn't re-injure it or anything, so he'll play this week. And then he was inactive, and you're just like, whoa, okay. So Taylor Heineke played. And I just want to say first, Taylor Heineke played a great game. Honestly, he's going to get paid to be someone's backup next year. He played very well against that Tampa Bay defense. He took those top bowl blitzes and he played well. He made plays. He gave them a chance to win that ball game. And so that's just the first thing I want to say right now. Tyler Heineke played a great game. Came up short at the end, but it happens. You came out of that game having more respect for Tyler Heineke than you did coming into the game, because we never really seen him play. And the only time we saw him play, he threw 3 interceptions against the Falcons. So all you remember is that game and think, oh, he's not that good. And then you see this game and think, oh, snap. Like, oh, he can play. So that's something that I think we can definitely come out of this game and say that's a great job for him. He even came out after the game and said, I want to stay here. I want to be with Coach Ron Rivera. So he's basically saying, I want to be the backup here. And he probably will be. I've already talked about last show, potentially Cam Newton getting in the mix, but I think Tyler Heineke has a great, if not there, somebody's going to say, hey, we want you to back up our guy here. But in the game, Tampa Bay, they have been much more effective offensively. People have been saying they've been running more of Tom Brady's offense with a mixture of Bruce Arians' deep play passing game now, which has made the offense more effective, which I do agree with. This offense does look more explosive. They look better. And so now, with that, Tampa Bay now looks like one of the most dangerous teams in the playoffs again. I remember, throughout the year, we were trying to say, oh, they're going to be a Super Bowl team. Oh, they're not going to be a Super Bowl team. Oh, they're going to be a Super Bowl team. Well, nah, they're not going to be a Super Bowl team. Now, they look like they can. Now, they have to go against a team next week in the Saints that has had their number. But overall, they look like a completely different team than they were earlier in the year. And Tom Brady still looks great at his age. Listen, I have no issue with the man. Now, do I want to see this man win another ring? No, but I have no issue with the man. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play this game. And you're seeing it on display. But really, this game was just a story of, again, what is one thing I've said about this Washington football team? They can be had in the secondary. And that's what you saw. If they didn't get to Brady, Brady was able to make some plays over the top against these guys. And it showed. So, like I said, going into the offseason, if you're the football team, the first question is this. The quarterback situation. Now, Alex Smith has played very well for the Washington football team. They're not really in any draft position necessarily to draft a guy in terms of maybe someone you would want to start day one next year in terms of like the top quarterbacks, but they can still get a quarterback. And to me, I think that's where their quarterback situation as a whole in terms of starter and backup is interesting, because you got Tyler Heineke, who played well. You need to start thinking into the future. I still don't think you look at Tyler Heineke and say, okay, he's going to be a franchise quarterback. But he's going to be a top backup in this league, which is still very valuable. And so would you potentially use that opportunity and say, okay, we can maybe do another year with Alex Smith, Tyler Heineke, then maybe first, second, third round draft a quarterback and let him develop for a year and then potentially give him a chance to be our guy. I think if you're head coach Ron Rivera, that's something you would definitely consider. I think it's something you would definitely look at because why not? And overall, I think if you're Washington, you have two young receivers in Sims and Terry McLaurin. Logan Thomas seems like he's going to be a really good tight end in the league after converting from quarterback. Offensively, they're not bad. Now, of course, you can always tweak it. Antonio Gibson is basically been, if not one of the best rookie running backs of this year's class. And so you can obviously look at this and say, okay, you could always get better. You could always get another big play receiver. You could always improve something if you're the football team. Defensively, you basically just want to try to get better on the back end. Remember, you have the pass rush. That's your strength, is your pass rush. So that's something you just want to keep intact. You can get better on the back end, and then you can try to become more explosive in the passing game. Even though I also think you got to think about Alex Smith is the quarterback. He's not really a guy who you can say, hey, we need you to throw deep a lot. So you probably may not necessarily have to get that now because it's not going to really change the offense of Alex Smith, the quarterback. Because you clearly saw with this offense, Alex Smith has had a lot of success. He was 5-1. So the football team really is set up right now to me as one of the two teams right now who look like they could have the most success moving forward with the construction of this team. Because I think Ron Rivera is going to make additions to where they need to make additions, get better. And I think I don't think the NFC East is going to have a year they had this year. So they're going to have to be better. And I think they will be. So it's going to be exciting to watch the Washington football team moving forward. And then in terms of Tampa Bay, like I said, they're going against their arch nemesis Saints next week. They look much better. Offense looks much better. Defensively, we all know their weakness. They can get had in the back end, but if that pass rush can get to you, it can be trouble. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens moving forward. And now we're getting into the Sunday games. And the first Sunday game was Lamar Jackson in the rematch versus the Tennessee Titans and Ryan Tannehill. Now, the Titans came out of this game losing, going home. Ravens win. Lamar Jackson gets his first playoff win. Great for him. And this game looked like it was going to be ugly early for the Ravens. Lamar threw a pick. They scored. Then the Titans got a field goal. It was 10-0. You thought, oh, man. Oh, boy. Ravens about to get ran out of the building. The playoff curse continues. The playoff woes continue. Lamar Jackson just can't do it. It adds fuel to the fire. He can't be the quarterback. And then the Titans only scored 3 points after that. The defense for the Ravens showed up and shut down Derrick Henry. And they were able to limit that passing game. And then Lamar Jackson, the one thing I'm most impressed about with Lamar Jackson in this game is the fact that he came into this game. People were looking at him saying it's because he can't throw it as great as other quarterbacks. That's why you can't win with him. But Lamar showed you, I can run and beat you. And that's what he did. He ran and beat the Titans. Now, yes, it does, and they won an ugly game. Because I think that's another thing, too. Two things they proved is that they can come back and win games. And second, they can play ugly games and win. Because some people think, the Ravens have to play a certain style to win games. They can't win ugly games. They have to win games that are kind of finesse, kind of big play games. Speed games. They can't win the ugly game. And they did that. They beat the Titans, a team who we consider one of the most physical teams in football under Mike Vrabel. And then if you look at the Titans, Derrick Henry got shut down. Simple as that. The Ravens had the game plan to shut down Derrick Henry. Brian Tannehill didn't play bad in this game. He didn't. It's just when they needed certain third down conversions, they just weren't able to convert on third down. Ravens got off the field on third down and kept giving Lamar Jackson opportunities. And that's what gave him the win in this game. Now, if you look into the offseason, if you're the Titans, you only had 19 sacks this year. That is your number one priority. you have to improve the pass rush. Have to. Because offensively, I still think they have a good enough offense to win games in this league. Because sometimes you play the good games, and I think they have a good enough offense to win. But you can't get 19 sacks. Now, they got to Lamar Jackson a couple of times in this game, but you can't have 19 sacks on a year. Now, yes, Clowney was out for the year. We'll see if they bring back Clowney next year. It's something they'll probably consider. But you have to improve the pass rush. If you don't improve the pass rush, that was the biggest issue with Tennessee this year. Honestly, if they had a pass rush, they would probably be one of the best teams in all of football. They're a very well put together team by Mike Vrabel, very well coached. So it's not anything like that. It's literally just they couldn't get after the passer. And if you can't get after the passer, your secondary can't cover forever. And that came back to haunt them a couple of times. If you're the Titans, your biggest question on the offensive end, what is the future of Corey Davis? Corey Davis had a very sneaky, very good year for them. He missed those last 2 games of their last drive, plays of that last drive, which really hurt them. Maybe he got hurt. I'm assuming he got hurt. That's why he didn't play. Maybe he had a shoe problem. I don't know. But he's going to be a free agent. And a lot of teams know Corey Davis can ball. So if you're the Titans, you probably want to find another guy to go opposite A.J. Brown. Last year about the Tennessee Titans and what made them so great is when Tannehill and A.J. Brown hooked up, they were a big play offense. This year, they still could make big plays, but I felt like the passing game wasn't always as much of a big play offense as it was last year. And so I think if they could get back to that, that's going to help. But obviously, listen, you still have Derrick Henry. Listen, you're going to have games where sometimes your best running back and the running game isn't that great. And I think Tannehill, especially in this Tennessee team, this Tennessee offense, is good enough to win games. I just think sometimes you just had a bad game. This was the game for him, the game for the team where they just didn't come out to show offensively. And like I said, Baltimore has one of the best defenses in the league. So this isn't like, oh, wow, this is crazy that they were able to pull off this type of performance. And so we're just going to have to see how everything comes together at the end of the day and see how things work out, because I think overall, these teams look really good. I think there's a lot of good things that can happen here. And I look forward to seeing the upgrades Mike Vrabel makes, because he's a guy who's going to see, okay, what do we need to do? Make what he needs to do happen, coach him up, and they'll be ready to go. The Titans are going to be a team in the AFC South for years to come to still be up there. Unless injuries plague them, Tannehill's play deteriorates, or Derrick Henry deteriorates. So that's going to be big for them moving forward. But Ravens move on. Big matchup next week in a rematch with the Bills. Played earlier this year. Ravens, get a chance to get a second crack at them. So we'll have to see how everything turns out with these two teams. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to wrap up the Wildcard recap show by talking about the last 2 Wildcard games. So stay tuned right here on the GSMC Football Podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we went back over more wildcard games. We went over Ravens and Titans. That great game in Nashville. Lamar Jackson getting his first playoff win. Great for Lamar Jackson. Happy for Lamar Jackson. And also the Washington football team and Taylor Heineke's expiring performance against Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But Tampa Bay proceeded to prevail and move on to the next round. So now we're going to finish up the review of the playoff games with these last 2 playoff games. The Browns and Steelers that ended Sunday night, and then Bears and Saints. So we're going to go ahead and get into the Bears and Saints first, as that was the first game they're in. So this was, well, first I want to talk about this game was on Nickelodeon. This was the Nick game. So let me tell you about some of the stuff they did on Nickelodeon. I only watched it for like 5 minutes. Not because I just didn't want to watch it, but, for me, my presentation matters. I rather prefer the regular CBS presentation. If you scored a touchdown, they would have these animated, CGI slime blasters, because Nickelodeon is known for slime. And every time a player would score, it would blast slime into the end zone like they're sliming the players. They also had Nate Burleson being color commentator. Actually, play-by-play, color commentator. They had a Nickelodeon young star, also as a play-by-play. And then another guy who's actually decent play-by-play guy. He wasn't bad, also. So they compared certain, players to cartoons on Nickelodeon and stuff like that. It was basically an experience to give parents a chance to watch the game with their child. And it basically helped teach the game to the kids, basically, through Nickelodeon. Like, it was, basically a very informational way of watching the game for children, because it was directed towards kids. And so, that's basically what it was for. And it was interesting. It definitely made some waves on social media, some of the stuff they did. So, that was that. But to the game, actually, this was a very boring game. Nothing really happened. It was 7-3 after the first half. I mean, the Saints, they won. They started playing better in the second half, extended the lead. Mitchell Trubisky and the offense spun out, but it was just an overall boring game. Wasn't that exciting. This is, as everybody expects, they even said it before the game, this is expected to be Drew Brees' last run. So, this is the last time we may ever see Drew Brees play in the Saints uniform in terms of this playoff postseason. Alvin Kamara, did his thing. I mean, remember, this is the first time all season, I think, I can't remember when was the last time, but basically Michael Thomas, Drew Brees, and Alvin Kamara have all been in the field. Remember, Michael Thomas had that ankle injury from week 2 that he's been dealing with, and he was out of the lineup a lot with that injury. On IR. Alvin Kamara, he's been the main guy who's played this year. But you remember, Drew Brees was out for about 3-4 games, and then Kamara missed a game or two. And so this basically is the game that all of them came back. They're all healthy. And the Bears were down Raekwon Smith. They were down one of their better corners. They were actually down their second and third corner. They were down their deep threat, Mooney. They had a lot of injuries in this game, coming into this game, so they already had an uphill climb to begin with. And overall, this game, like I said, wasn't that exciting, but, the Saints won, and, now they're going to go on and play Tampa Bay next week. But let me get into the Bears. So the biggest Bear question right now going into the offseason is what's going to happen with Mitchell Trubisky. A lot of people feel like Mitchell Trubisky has played himself into getting at least a short-term deal with the Bears to still be the quarterback. Because, again, with them being a playoff team, they're not necessarily in a position, again, to get a top quarterback. But they could still draft a guy if they want to develop a guy. I don't know if Nick Foles is going to be there next year. But Mitch Trubisky played well down the stretch. Now, he didn't play that great in this playoff game, but listen, there was a big throw early in the game to Javon Wims in the end zone. He put it right on the money. He dropped it. That could have easily changed the complexion of the game. So Mitchell Trubisky can make some plays. I think everybody can agree from where Mitchell Trubisky was to now, he's made improvement. It's not like he's the exact same quarterback from that time. And so the biggest thing with the Bears, and this is something I've noticed watching the Bears, Allen Robinson's a really good receiver. Really one of the underrated receivers in the game. He's a good receiver. But I don't think the Bears have enough juice. And Mooney's fine too, but I don't feel like still they have enough juice offensively. Now, Tyreek Cohen was out a lot of the year when he got injured earlier in the year with a season-ending injury. That could affect things. Could have made their running game a little bit more dynamic. David Montgomery's a good running back. I think him and Tyreek Cohen work in tandem very well. But to me, I feel like the Bears need a big play wide receiver, like a guy who can break the game open. Mooney's a good down the field player, but he's not a game breaker to me. He's one of those guys who you can do a lot with because he has speed, but he's not a game breaker. And I think that would really be good to go with, because I feel like they have a lot of decent receivers, a lot of guys who can make some plays, kind of more jump ball guys like Wims and Ridley. And I feel like they need more juice on the offensive end. Jimmy Graham has played well for them as the tight end. Like, they have some stuff offensively they can work with. Matt Nagy coached himself to be the head coach again for at least another year of being considered the playoffs. Defensively, listen, this Bears defense wasn't as great as it was the previous year. But at the same time, they still are a really good defense. Like I said, they had injuries in this game. They have star players at every level. Overall, it's just about improving what you need to improve, finding the holes, whatever was your weakness this year. Listen, if it truly is Mitchell Trubisky that's still holding this team back, then okay. But listen, I think that Mitchell getting a short-term deal, a 2-year, maybe a 1-year contract is good. That way you don't have to commit financially long-term to him. And then if he continues to make strides going forward, then and maybe he has a step up in his play again next year, then maybe you can consider saying, oh, okay, maybe he can be the quarterback of the future. When Matt Nagy gave up the play calling to Bill Lazor, that helped Mitchell Trubisky hit the next level. Not hit the next level, but just play better. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Bears. But in terms of the Saints, listen, they've had Tampa Bay's number this entire year. They have a chance to make it 3-0. They remember the year that Cam Newton, they played the Panthers 3 times. In the playoffs once. Swept. This is another chance. They match up very well against Tampa Bay. And so we'll see how they do. Obviously, Tampa Bay, I feel like, is a different team. They're running kind of a different offense, more of a Tom Brady offense now. We'll see how that works. Clearly, if you're the Saints, you probably got to score a little bit more points to beat this team. You can't expect them to pitch another, great, almost shut down game on the defensive end against Tom Brady next week. You're going to have to score points. And so we're going to have to see how it goes. And now we're going to get into the last game of playoff Super Wildcard weekend. Browns and Steelers. And this game was shocking from the first quarter. From the first snap, you knew it was not Pittsburgh's night and they were destined to lose. Over the head of Ben Roethlisberger, touchdown Browns. Next interception, touchdown Browns. They get stopped, touchdown Browns. Another interception, touchdown Browns. You see a rhythm here? They were down 28-0 in the second quarter. 28-0. You don't win games starting out 28-0. Now, Pittsburgh played better to end the game. They scored over 30 points, but the Browns had 40. And Ben Roethlisberger looked terrible in the first half. Throwing 4 interceptions in the game total. It honestly looked like Ben's washed. And that it's time for him to retire. And I think this is what I think was always the biggest fear of Pittsburgh fans, because that's why they wish that the Steelers were more active in trying to get a future franchise quarterback for this team potentially. Because you knew Big Ben is getting to that point in his career where he's on a year-to-year kind of basis. He is not a guy who's like, I'm going to play 3-4 years. It's a year-to-year kind of thing. After the performance he just had. Now listen, this could be the opposite of what you think may happen. He could have a terrible game like this and says, I'm committed to come back next year and play better. Or he could sit this and say, you know what? It really may be time for me to go. We don't know what he's going to do. But overall, the issue with Pittsburgh, and ever since Mike Tomlin's been head coach, is that they just seem to become unbuttoned in certain games. They just seem to sometimes just not show up in certain games that you would think they're going to show up in. The fact that you remember, they almost beat the Browns last week with Mason Rudolph at quarterback and with several starters resting. They all play this week with Big Ben, and now all of a sudden you get basically run off your own field. How does that happen? How does that happen? It's something that I think the Browns are obviously in great position right now. Baker getting his first playoff win in his first game in the playoffs. Going next week against Kansas City. Quick preview on that game. Listen, the Browns secondary still isn't that good. So I'm projecting people are expecting Kansas City to blow the doors off Cleveland next week because they think Patrick Mahomes is going to have a field day with his secondary. But overall, listen, we know about this Browns offense. They can run the football. The running backs can catch the ball in the backfield. They got Jarvis Landry getting first down. They have the offense to make it a high-scoring game next week against Kansas City. They're a really good team. And, even without Kevin Stefanski, for them to come out and have that type of performance, they clearly were very well coached. And to me, these are the type of games that show you how good the coaching staff is. We don't have our head guy, and yet we're still able to dominate a team like Pittsburgh. That just shows you he just has great coaches. And remember, he was the offensive play caller. And then they had a new guy, and the offense was still great. And so, just great job by Cleveland staff and these players, giving them a playoff win. Because a lot of people were thinking Pittsburgh was going to come in and win this game just because of what happened last week. And for the Browns to not make the playoffs for the first time since literally 2000, their first playoff win since 97, I think it was Belichick's last year with the Jets. That was their last playoff win. And to now win this game, it's just great for that franchise. And so, listen, they got to play Kansas City next week. It's going to be a tough matchup. Offensively, they could probably score with Kansas City. But will they? We don't know. Because I don't know if the Browns are going to be able to have much resistance against Kansas City in their passing game, even though Kansas City has not looked as impressive as some people think they should. But like I said, back in the Pittsburgh sake, listen, Pittsburgh had injuries on the defensive end, so defensively they didn't look as great at the end of the year because they had some season-ending injuries that they have to get back and recover from. That affected some things. They have wide receivers, clearly. I think they have to improve the running game. I just think Connor's not good enough. I think they need to get a more dynamic running back in there. I think if Ben does come back, you're going to have to rely more on the running game. You can't be as bad in the running game as they were this year because I just don't like the Big Ben dependency. You're going to depend on your old quarterback to win you games. That's not Pittsburgh Steelers football. You could do that when you had the 3 Bs because you could also run it with Le'Veon too. You don't really have that with this team. And so, overall, I just think that they have some changes they need to make, and they need to make these changes ASAP. We'll see, like I said, if this is Big Ben's last game. If not, it's been a great run. It's been a great ride for Ben. But there's going to be some questions Mike Tomlin has to come into this offseason and think, okay, I'm going to have to reinvent this team a little bit because we can't have another season like we just had. But that's all the time we have here for this segment. That was all for this, actually, for this podcast. That was your Super Wildcard review, recap. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you guys tune in for me in the next episode as we preview the divisional round in our next episode of the GSMC Football Podcast. This is your host, Brice, signing out, saying have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.